Some places are great and worth going to for like a month or two. And then some places you get there and you're like, Jesus Christ, I can't wait till my flight's out of here, you know?
All right, well, name the place that's one day and that's all you need.
Have you ever been to Chad?
No.
It is not a nice place.
All right, so welcome back to another episode of Drop a Pin. Today we have a little bit of a different voyage. Typically we tell you at the top of the show where we're going to go, where we're going to dive deep in. Today we are talking to Lee Abbamonte, who has been to every single country, both poles, all kinds of golf courses, every single state 3 times. You're going to hear so much more from him, but we're going to wait until that interview is over to figure out where we're going to drop a pin and give you the deep dive that you're all craving.
We'll have a lot of options to choose from.
There will be a lot of options, and let's start running through those now. Here's Lee. All right, now on Drop a Pin, we are privileged to have Lee Abbamonte, who is the youngest person ever to go to every single country in the world and the North and South Pole. Lee, we are sure that you have a bunch of stories, and we're excited to get into them. How are you doing, my man?
I'm great, guys. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's pretty wild, man. Good to be here.
We don't want to pigeonhole you into talking about just one country, so feel free to really talk about wherever you want. And then afterwards, we'll hone in on one of those spots and see how much we can learn about it.
Yeah, let's start with where your love for traveling came from. Did you start traveling as a kid, or was it something that you got into when you got your own money?
No, man, I grew up in Trumbull, Connecticut. We didn't travel at all. All I did was play sports and, just normal kid stuff. My family didn't have much money. We surely didn't travel. The furthest I ever went from Connecticut was the Jersey Shore or Cape Cod. And other than that, I went to the University of Maryland. One of my buddies was studying abroad our junior year, and he was like, "Hey, dude, why don't you come to London with me and, study abroad?" I'm like, doing the fraternity thing, sports, the whole deal. And I mentioned it to my dad, and I was like, "Dad, what do you think of me going to London for a year with Mike?" And just, he's like, "What the fuck do you want to do that for?" And I was just like, "Well, screw you, man, I'm going." And literally that was it. So I just kind of went, despite my dad, on a whim to London, and little did I know that changed my life completely.
I've told many people London is probably the least exotic place you could ever go abroad.
But for like a 19-year-old, 20-year-old kid who had never been out of the country before, it's a great place to kind of get your big toe wet. They speak English. You can get around. They drive on the other side of the street. They talk funny, so you can kind of get a little feel. And then from there, it's easy to travel all over Europe. And that's exactly what I did.
What was your first trip that really gave you culture shock?
After I was in Europe, I just wanted to keep going. So that summer, I literally just bought a ticket to Asia. I bought a ticket to Tokyo and, JFK to Tokyo, and just got there by myself. I had no idea about anything. This is basically before the internet, or surely before I used it. So I'm just there with a Lonely Planet guidebook. And I'm just like, "Hey guys, I'm here. I don't speak any Japanese. I can't read the language." And it was just crazy because it taught me to kind of be self-sufficient in a place where I didn't speak the language and not a lot of people spoke English. And on that trip, I think I hit 8 or 9 Asian countries, just mind-blowing stuff. And then I was just like, you know what? I'm going to give Africa a shot. I'm going to give South America a shot.
How did you do that, really? How the saving up the money? Because it seems so daunting, the amount of time and energy and treasure that you spend doing this. Was it a full-time effort to save money so that you could continue to go on these trips?
Well, the truth is, I had a job really since I was 6 years old. I had a paper route in my neighborhood, and then I got more paper routes in my neighborhood. I shoveled snow, I raked leaves, I mowed lawns. I saved my money. I didn't spend anything. I didn't buy anything as a kid. So I went to college with money. I worked through college. I actually started a business in college, did okay with it, and then I worked on Wall Street right out of college, and basically just did pretty well. And the only thing I really spent money on, aside from rent in New York City, was travel. And that's pretty much what everything went to. And I realized that I treasured experiences more than anything else in the world. So I didn't buy anything. I just bought experiences, essentially.
Now, did you have a threshold of how long that you had to be in a place in order to count it as you've been there? I'll talk to people and be like, "Oh, yeah, I've been to this many states." And "Oh, well, what'd you do in Colorado?" "Well, I was at the airport." Fuck off. You didn't go. You didn't spend time in Colorado. You were in the airport. How long do you have to stay somewhere to consider check?
That's like the age old question amongst extreme travelers, right? Like some people lose their fucking mind about that question, right? Like, oh, you were only there for a day. But the way I look at it, it's like if you go for a day, someone's going to be like, you had to spend a week for it to count. And if you go for a week, somebody's going to say you had to spend a month. They're like, you barely know it after a month. You have to spend a year. So it's like a game you can't win. So my feeling is you just have to be satisfied with your own visit and, yeah, get out of the airport, of course, and actually do something. But the truth is, if you're in, let's say, just pick a random country, France, for a day, I mean, you're still in France. I mean,
Yeah.
it'd be a shame if you only spent a day in France, but the truth is you're there. And to be honest, some places are only worth a day or two. And like anyone who tells you any differently is lying to you. So some places are great and worth going to for like a month or two or back, 10 times. And then some places you get there and you're like, Jesus Christ, I can't wait till my flight's out of here.
All right, well, name the place that it's one day and that's all you need.
Have you ever been to Chad?
No.
It is not a nice place. There's a couple countries over there. There's in West Africa. There's a place called Guinea.
Yeah.
I was actually there during a coup. Right, like literally, we crossed into Guinea and get to the hotel in Conakry, which is the capital, and literally just checking in, and the guy's just like, "Oh, you guys got to get the hell out of here." And we're like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Oh, they're like overthrowing the government. There's a coup going on right now." And we're like, okay, so like, what do we do? So he's like, well, my cousin over there sitting on the couch right there, he can drive you to Sierra Leone. I was like, you fucking kidding me? All right. So we get in a car with this guy, drive 12 hours on like not even a road. It's just like dirt, like bumping up and down the whole way. And all of a sudden we're at the border of Sierra Leone. And we're like, well, how do we get from the border of Sierra Leone in the middle of nowhere to Freetown, which is the capital of Sierra Leone? He's like, oh, I'll just call my cousin on the other side of the border and he'll come and drive you. You're like, okay. So, it's like that kind of thing that happens. But I mean, there's some countries that operate like that and just totally nonsensical, but it all seems to work eventually. But yeah, some places are only worth one day.
You were probably very unique on Wall Street because I assume a lot of those guys, whenever they have free time or money to blow, they'll be going to Nantucket or the Hamptons, or maybe they go to the same resort in the Caribbean every year.
Yeah, I mean, they all thought I was out of my mind, believe me. But like, when we go out after work, I mean, I was the one with the cool stories to tell, and they're just like, yeah, I went to Cancun or I went to the Hamptons or something like that, and you're like, all right, cool. And but yeah, man, it was just a different experience, but I just figured out early that I wanted more from life than just the kind of usual, and I really wasn't interested in like scenes and like showing off and that type of thing. I just wanted to do me.
Big difference for me. I love showing off. I love stunting on everybody if I can. And I think like I did 10 years in the Marine Corps, a little bit about me. And so I know that whenever you go to like a bar, you're hanging out with a new group of people, you have a couple go-to stories in your back pocket when people want to know a little bit about your life. You're sitting down, you're back home, you're in one of the bars, you're at like, let's say 25-year, 30-year high school reunion, and somebody wants to know what's your go-to story, and you're really trying to get the ladies and all the dudes jealous. What's your go-to story?
Man, I don't even know where to begin on that one, but I'll tell you the story that'll be chapter 1 of my book. It's so I was there's 193 countries in the world, right? 193 UN nations. And at the time, believe it or not, I actually wasn't trying to go to every country in the world. I was trying to go to every country plus every territory, basically everywhere on earth, right?
Wow.
And going to every country just kind of was going to happen at some point, but I wasn't like in a rush to do it. So I was at 192 and I planned on going to 193, which would have been Libya back in 2011. And then all of a sudden the war breaks out in Libya. The Arab Spring happens. Everything goes crazy. They shut down the airspace. They basically shut down the country for months. All of a sudden I get this email from a guy I know in Cairo, and he's just like, hey man, there's no government in Eastern Libya. So I think you can kind of sneak into Eastern Libya from Western Egypt. And I was just like, oh, great. And I literally didn't ask any questions. I just went to JFK and I flew to Cairo. And then I met this guy for lunch, and he told me to fly to this remote outpost called Mersa Mutra, which no one's ever heard of. So I go to Mersa Mutra, right? And I'm by myself. And like, I just get there. I had $5,000 in my pocket, right? Because I figured I'd have to pay somebody something. And I'm at the airport. I speak like 3 words of Arabic. I see a guy wearing a blazer with a Libyan rebel lapel pin. So I figured, he's probably educated and might speak some English. So I go over to him and he's like, yeah, I speak English. And I explain to him what I'm trying to do, trying to get to every country and all that. And he's just like, wow, you're fucking weird, right? But I'm like, okay. And So I'm like, well, can you just help me get to the border, like get a taxi, tell him what I'm trying to do. He goes, so you get to the border, then what are you going to do? I'm like, I literally have no idea. I didn't really think about it. I'm just going to do it. And he goes, no, 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 no. And I'm like, okay. And he goes, my brother's coming from Tobruk, Libya with a minivan, and we're going to drive across the border back to Tobruk, and you're going to come with us, and I'm going to help you. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? And so I offered him money. He wouldn't take money. He was just like, I just want to help you. I'm like, it's amazing. So I literally jump in the back of a minivan with these Arab dudes who I've never met before in my life. We drive like 2 or 3 hours or whatever it was to the border, and we're sitting in line for the border, and we get to about 3 cars away from the border. Now, this border is in the middle of the desert. Like, there's nothing there. There's no towns or roads or, just the border. On the other side of the border, we see these big trucks, right? And didn't know what they were at the time, but they had all types of dudes on them. And they didn't really look like, Egyptian or Libyan or African. It turns out they're Chinese smugglers trying to smuggle fake Marlboro cigarettes from Libya into Egypt because no one's patrolling the border. They wouldn't have to pay a tariff on the goods, right? So, at the time, I'm just like, oh, that sounds like a smart idea, right? But of course, the rebels, Libyan rebels who were controlling the border wanted them to pay. They're like, well, we're in control here. You have to pay us. And these guys didn't want to pay. All of a sudden, this like firefight breaks out on the other side of the border, like 30, 40 feet from us. The minivan gets hit with bullets. I'm in this minivan. I'm like, holy shit. I'm like freaking out. I'm like, I'm going to die here in the desert, in the middle of nowhere. No one even knows where I am, all this stuff. And so all of a sudden I like scream at the guy. I'm like, back up, back up. And the guy, he like slams on the brakes and like literally just drives out into the sand in the minivan. And so we sit there for a couple hours, literally a couple hours. And all of a sudden, the guy turns to me and goes, okay, I think we can go back to the border now. And I'm just like, okay, man, like whatever. So we get there. And then the guy turns to me and goes, give me your passport. I'm like, okay. And he goes, here's the deal, right? And I'm like, okay. He goes, you're going to be a dentist going into Libya to do humanitarian work for the Libyan people. And I'm like, I'm not a dentist. And he goes, doesn't matter. You're the only person in the country with straight white teeth. So I'm like, okay. And he goes, we go to the border. He says some stuff to the border guard. And the guy literally looks at me, just kind of smiles and he goes, welcome to Libya, and points to his teeth. And I'm like,
wow, that works. Yeah.
Was the firefight, was it between the Chinese cigarette smugglers and the Libyan folks?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. It's just like, apparently they weren't very good shots and some of them came across the border.
Damn, all for the love of cigarettes.
Yeah, you never hear about that on the news either.
No, and that's the second story. You mentioned 2 stories, one from Chad and one from Libya, and both involved getting in cars with people that you didn't know and going for long treks. How long did it take you to get comfortable with doing things like that? Because I think most people who are listening has never traveled and have never really interacted with people from a foreign country. They don't really... that's a very foreign idea, just like the lands are foreign. Like the idea of trusting someone that get in their car that's not an Uber driver.
Right. So, I mean, it just kind of started casually, right? Like in Europe, you take taxis or you stay in like random apartments. And this is, again, before the internet was a big thing and you couldn't just book hotels and hostels online. You had to go to them or call them or like whatever. So you just stay in random places and it develops confidence. Then as I traveled around like the developing world, I took a lot of random rides in places like Brazil and Argentina, and then in South Africa, and then in places like Ethiopia and Malawi and slightly more developed, but still less developed places. And you just realize like how it works. And you realize to kind of just be confident and stern, but nice. And always just, give a little extra, and you got to have patience. And you just develop confidence when you do it. But then in the real kind of dangerous places, that's when it gets a little hairy and you're never fully comfortable with it, but you just have enough confidence that they think you're like a big deal because you're like an American in their country, right? So to them, most of them haven't met someone like me before. You know what I mean? They haven't met like an American or even just like a European, really, because nobody goes to these fucking places, Mm-hmm. So like when you get there and you're almost like a celebrity and they just kind of stare at you and they just want to talk to you or practice their English. And you realize that they're generally good people. That's the thing about traveling. You realize most people around the world are really good people. It's usually just the governments that kind of suck in places,
Yeah, I would say my biggest fear traveling in a country like Libya is that someone would see you, be like, oh, this guy is a big deal, and then think to hold you hostage so they can get some sort of ransom from your family and friends back home. Was that your concern? Have you ever had any sort of situation like that, or it's been pretty smooth?
I mean, it crossed my mind a few times, but I never really had anything like that. I never had like a gun pulled on me. I mean, I was in a car that got hit with bullets, but it wasn't like specifically at me. I've been tried to be robbed a few times, but like I'm, a bigger dude, so they're not generally going to come for you if they're going to try to rob somebody. So it's just like one of those things. And again, if you show confidence to people, they'll generally kind of respect that because they don't know who you are and they don't want to mess with something, and they see like a foreigner and they're just like, oh, I probably shouldn't mess with them because then I can get in trouble back home, because people don't generally mess with tourists in most countries.
I was reading that you played golf in Afghanistan during the war.
Yeah, man. I played at the Kabul Country Club, I think it was called, and they don't have greens there; they just have dirts, and it's like this like crazy 9-hole course. And I had a guy with like an AK-47 like guarding me. I have a cool picture. I don't know if you saw it on the website. It's wild, man.
How did you manage to travel to Afghanistan during the war if you weren't in the military yourself?
Yeah, that was one of two places that I had to organize, like sort of an armed guard kind of deal. So like John McCain had gone there just before I was there, and so I just sort of Googled like the logistics company that a senator would use, and I literally just emailed them, I think it was, or I called them, whatever, and set it up. I literally had the same protection that like a U.S. politician would have. So that was the first time I did that. And the second time was in Mogadishu, Somalia. And that was like a whole other situation. We had like 10 guys plus an armored car. It was like wild.
Like, isn't there a rule they don't let Americans travel to Somalia unless they hire guards?
Yeah, I mean, that place is like just lawless, right? Like Mogadishu, if you go in the north into Somaliland, it's not so bad. But Mogadishu is just, there's no government, right? Nobody controls it. It's just, it is madness. It's anarchy, really. And I don't really see any signs of it changing. But I honestly had a great experience there. But I definitely would not have felt comfortable had we not had the armada of people that we had.
But the people you met on the streets in Mogadishu were pretty friendly?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was with a buddy of mine, and, they were just fascinated by us. It's not like they see guys like us every day on the streets of Mogadishu. So it was, they wanted to come and take pictures with you, or just like shake your hand, or, they wanted you to take selfies with them. And it was just really cool. It's really heartwarming. And again, it's one of those human things, right? That you realize these people, just by not luck of the draw, end up in this kind of shit box of a place and really have no options. So if I can make them smile and, kind of understand them and show them that, Americans are not bad people and we're nice and we respect them, I feel like I'm doing as best I can. And it's just a really cool thing to see.
And now since you've accomplished it, you've gone to every country and both the poles, where do you go from here? Because somebody with a sensitive adventure like you, I can't imagine you're just like, well, now I'm just going to hang out in Gloucester forever.
He's going to space, baby.
Yeah.
Hey, we'll see about that one. So, after I did all the countries, then I went to the North and South Pole, which is, I could talk about that for an entire podcast. And then I went to, I've been to every state 3 times each. I've been to every national park, including the ones in American Samoa and the ones in Arctic Alaska and the Virgin Islands. And I've been to every professional stadium in North America. And I've been to most major college stadiums in America. And I've been to most major soccer, rugby, and tennis stadiums around the world.
Oh, my God.
Buy a couch,
yeah,
dude.
I got fucking problems.
You need to buy a couch. 1 weekend with your feet up. So let's get into the polls.
Which poll should we talk about?
Let's talk.
The South Pole's a slightly better story.
Well, let's talk the better ones. Yeah, let's do South. Yeah.
So I tried to get to the South Pole for years, right? But it's really fucking expensive. It's like $100,000 or more to get there, right? So I didn't want to pay that, obviously. So I had to raise some money by getting other people to go, and I worked a commission off, and I ended up going for free. And so the first year I went there was 2013, and I happened to be on the same trip as Prince Harry. And so I'm down there, like, just through happenstance with Harry and his team from the BBC or whatever it was. They were doing something for like Wounded Warriors or Walking with the Wounded. I forget the name of the organization. What happens is you fly in this crazy Aleutian from Cape Town to a place called Novo-Lazarovskaya Russian Air Base, which you land on a blue ice runway in the middle of fucking nowhere. It's in Antarctica. It's 73 degrees. And so you land and then you're there and you're supposed to take one of these World War II era bachelors that land on skis, and you're supposed to fly to something called 83 degrees to refuel and then onto the South Pole if weather allows. So when I was there the first time, one of these planes crashed and nobody was killed, but you couldn't operate the one plane, and they can only carry like 10 to 12 people at a clip. So I was down there for about 3 weeks. We had really bad weather, and I'm camping, by the way, and camping in Antarctica sucks. It's so cold. Like when you have to go to the bathroom in like minus 60 degrees, it's an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, because your shit's like frozen before it comes out.
Dude, yeah, I don't even want to talk about it, but yeah, that's exactly pretty accurate. And, so we're down there, and long story short, the Russians control pretty much everything in Antarctica, aside from South Pole Station and McMurdo Base, and also in the polar region, in the Arctic region, by the way. So the Russians essentially gave Prince Harry and his group some priority over my group to use the one plane that was operable. And we ended up not making it to the South Pole where his group did. So you can imagine there were some pretty pissed off rich people in my group, including, not that I'm rich, but including myself, because the amount of time, money, and effort that's spent on a trip like that, it's just mind blowing, right? And the fact that I didn't make it, I've never been so angry in my life. So I had to kind of regroup. And then I literally did the same thing the following year, and I was able to make the South Pole. And it was like this huge emotional like experience because it had taken so long, and I spent so much mental anguish and finances and everything to get there. And but yeah, the first year Prince Harry kind of cost me, not because he did it on purpose or anything, but just we were just kind of victims of circumstance there.
Now, I heard that kind of messes with your brain when you're actually at the South Pole because of the magnetic differences. Did you notice anything like that you felt like lightheaded when you were there? Like the poles in your brain were off, essentially?
Not really. I was just trying not to have my face fall off because it was so fucking cold. It was like minus 63 degrees. I mean, like you feel like you have boogers in your nose, right? And then if you go like that, something falls out and it's an icicle. It's not a booger, right? It's like the little hairs in your nose like freeze. One thing that's cool about the South Pole that people don't realize is South Pole Station is run by the Americans, right? And they actually have like a basketball court in there. So I go and bang on the door because I wanted them to stamp our passports, because we got there at 2 a.m. So everyone was sleeping. So I'm just sitting there banging, banging, banging. Finally, somebody comes in and they allow me to go in and stamp everyone's passport. And I see the basketball court and I was like, hey, can I shoot some hoops? So I'm in like my full Antarctica gear shooting basketball at South Pole Station. That was pretty cool.
And like, do people only live in that station during the Antarctica summer, if there even is an Antarctica summer, or some people there year round?
Yeah, there's a couple people there year round. Like I can't remember the guy's name, but I follow him on like Instagram or something, and he's always posting pictures of like 24-hour darkness, And I mean, those are really extreme fucking people who stay down there all year. I mean, those people are they're okay with living in the darkness for like 8 months a year. I mean, that's pretty insane. Plus, just going outside is just like a whole endeavor in and of itself,
Yeah, there's this dude that I used to love watching on TikTok, and he had a couple of documentaries too where he lived like way up in the Arctic Circle, and he would go hunting, and he would have these crazy trips where he'd shoot like a caribou, and then he'd have to walk it back like 4 or 5 miles, be exhausted. And the cameraman asked him, like, why do you do this? Why do you live up here? Because he had a cameraman at that time, but typically he's by himself. And he was like, if you live up this area, if you live in the Arctic by yourself, you do it because you hate other people and you don't want to be a serial killer.
Or you are a serial killer and you're just trying not to be.
Yeah. I assume on the South Pole, everyone in that station is a scientist of some sorts.
Yeah, they're all scientists or psychopaths, one or the other.
Gotta be, right?
On your first attempt that failed, you mentioned that you recruited a lot of other people to come, and that subsidized your trip. Mm-hmm. How did you deal with those people after they were told you're not making it to the South Pole? Like, were they angry at you, or were they more angry at Prince Harry? Like, how did that work?
They were angry at the guys who ran the camp that we were at because we felt like they could have been more aggressive and like kind of getting us to the front of the line. Like some of these people, I won't drop names, but like some of these people were really powerful, like business people, right? Like people you don't fuck with, and they felt like they got fucked with, so they were really angry. And in hindsight, it's kind of funny, but at the time, like, I mean, because I made it out, I'm okay with it, but I was so mad at the time. And these people with giant egos who were sort of passed over, for this British team, they were pretty pissed. But I didn't really have to deal with any of it. They kind of took it out on the team because it surely wasn't my fault.
No, not at all.
You had two spots that you told us about, Antarctica and then again Libya, that were logistic nightmares getting into. What was the hardest trip that you had to set up to knock something off your list?
Yeah, when I did it, and it's totally different now, so this doesn't age well, but Angola in South kind of Western Africa, Central Western Africa was the hardest visa in the world at the time. I was denied an Angola visa, it must have been 6 times. And why? For no fucking reason. The government just runs a scam there with oil, like a lot of the countries in that kind of part of Africa. So they don't want foreigners coming in and basically messing it up or, like ruining their scam or who knows what they're doing. So they just don't want you in the country. So eventually I was able to kind of backdoor it through this like British travel agency that had some sort of connection, but it ended up costing me like a fortune just to get the visa to go to this like shitty city called Luanda, which is the capital. And then I went up to a place called Cabinda, which is this exclave of Angola as well. So for, the amount of effort and money that I spent to go there, there was like no value there. Mm-hmm. But that was probably the hardest place for me to get to. And back then, Saudi was also really tough and Pakistan was really tough too.
Mm. Yes, Saudi now seems to be really promoting tourism and they'll let anyone go.
I'll be there in December, man. They're just you can just walk in that. Funnily enough, I don't know, funnily, is that a word? The last time I was in Saudi, I was there literally when Jamal Khashoggi was murdered.
Wow.
And I was, I do TV sometimes, and I'm just getting emails and stuff to do live hits from inside Saudi Arabia about like what it's like to be in Saudi when Khashoggi was murdered and this whole uproar around the world. And I'm like, there's no fucking way that like a half Jewish kid in Saudi Arabia lying about my religion is going to do this while I'm still in the country, That's
probably smart. I read something that Angola has one of the richest cities in the world just because of all the oil wealth. Is that true?
I'm not sure if it's the richest city, but it's one of the most expensive cities. That might have been it. And it's ungodly expensive, like to stay in, I forget, I stayed in like a quarter of a star hotel. That's how bad it was. And it was like $400 a night.
Wow.
So, I mean, that whole part of Africa is ridiculously expensive for absolutely no reason other than they don't really want people there.
Is it that way for locals too, or just for tourists?
No, it's just for like basically the only people who go to these types of countries are oil people, European and American oil, like Equatorial Guinea, Angola, Nigeria, places like this that have like vast oil wealth and just, basically criminals running the country. And that's just how they do it.
I don't know if I'll have a chance to ask anyone on this podcast again about this country because I know very few people who have been. Papua New Guinea. What was that like?
Yeah, for me, Papua New Guinea was like a weird experience because I flew all the way to Port Moresby and then up to one of the islands, and and I was just going to do diving and like the whole thing that everyone does there. And when I arrived, actually, this random you asked this because I got the news that my grandmother had passed away. So after flying all the way there, I literally had to turn around and just kind of go home. So I didn't have much of an experience, but I do plan at some point to go back, and I would probably go into the jungles to, where the cannibal type people are said to live. I have a few friends that have been there somewhat recently, and they both say it's pretty cool.
Damn.
If you can avoid getting eaten.
Yeah, you don't want to get eaten. That's a good point.
I have heard that Port Moresby, I think at one point was considered like the city with the highest crime rate in the world. Like it's not really a safe place to be walking around.
It's a terrible city. It's not a good place. Like it's like one of the worst capital cities in the world, and there's some bad ones.
We just did an episode on Bhutan, and we were talking about some of the animals there that you don't really hear a whole lot about. There's one that's like a goat and antelope mix. I'm sure going everywhere in the world, you came across some pretty cool sights that you wouldn't expect. Was there any animals that absolutely just blew your dick off?
Well, no animals blew my dick, but just in general. But yeah, I've seen some pretty wild animals. I mean, I've been on actually exactly 77 different safaris like around Africa. But I think the coolest animals to me are in Australia. I know that sounds like just an easy out, but there's so many animals. A lot of them can actually kill you, but they have some pretty cool ones. My favorite happens to be a wombat. If you don't know what a wombat looks like, Google it, because they're just these funny looking creatures.
My favorite wombat fact is that they shit squares, cubes.
Shit cubes.
Yeah, so whenever they shit, so it'll stay and not roll down, it is a cube. So it just kind of drops and stays wherever it is. So like underneath there'll be like little cube of shit.
Yeah, it looks exactly like a brownie.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's wombat facts. One of the most common questions that we get, especially since we started this, is people asking where they should start their traveling journey. As somebody that's been everywhere, somebody's asking you, let's not do like a London or a France or Paris or anything like that. Somewhere a little bit off the beaten path that you think is a great spot for somebody to start their traveling journey.
Yeah, I think throw yourself into a place that's comfortable but also pretty exotic. A place like South Africa or Argentina, a place like where you have a big city and you can feel sort of comfortable, but you can get off the beaten track and kind of, like I said, get your big toe wet with real travel. My favorite line to say is, to be a real traveler, you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And you can only get to that point by putting yourself in ridiculous situations, right? And like kind of to your question before, how did I get comfortable with that? It was just by doing it tons and tons of times over and over. And you just develop a comfort with being uncomfortable. And that's what I would probably suggest to people. Like, go to places that you're not comfortable with, stay in a place that's comfortable, and then put yourself in uncomfortable positions and come back and keep doing it, you know?
A quote I always say is that it's better to be off the beaten path than just on the path beating off.
Hell yeah.
Can't argue with that.
Cool. Well, out of all the countries we've talked about today, which one do you think we should take a deeper dive into afterwards?
I mean, honestly, just based on what he talked about, and I've heard it sucks too, I kind of want to do Chad just because it sucks so bad.
All right, then if we're going to do Chad, then we need to have you say a few more reasons why it sucks.
Well, here's the thing, right? So you get to Chad, and the capital city is called N'Djamena, right? It's spelled N'Djamena, which is, whatever. And you get there, and it's just dust. Like, it's just sand. So this is one of the few countries where I'm walking around like with, this is pre-COVID, right? And like I'm walking around with like a bandana, like covering my face so I don't inhale like all the bad air and dust. And there's just pollution everywhere. And I hate like saying shit about like really poor countries, but the poverty is terrible. The garbage is everywhere. It smells like shit. And, there's just not much to see, right? Like you get there, you're like, okay, and then you go outside the city. So I always try to get outside of the capital city and go to like a village or mountains or like whatever. And I went to a village, I think it was called Gowrie. And, I was there like 15, 16 years ago. This is just off the top of my head, by the way. So if I misspelled it or mispronounced it or whatever.
Great memory, yeah.
And you get there, and again, like most of these places, the people are really, really kind, and they're, the children are adorable, and they all come up to you and they want to watch you take selfies and take pictures of them. And then they want you to show them the picture, because they don't have digital cameras and stuff. And, it's really heartwarming stuff. But then you're like, okay, now what? And you're just like, oh man, I can't breathe this air anymore. You start coughing up like dust, and I don't know. It's just, just garbage everywhere. It smells, people burn the garbage, so it smells like shit. And, a lot of these places don't have running water, and it's just, there's nothing to do.
Sounds like a really lighthearted listen for our podcast.
Yeah.
Very light.
How about the food in Chad? What'd you eat?
Man, nothing notable.
The look on your face, like, absolutely not. No,
Yeah.
it's not a cuisine spot.
And the truth is, when you go to a lot of these places, you're so careful with what you eat because pretty much everything gives you diarrhea. So you're just like literally just trying not to get sick. And diarrhea you can handle, but when you start puking too, and then you start, you get like food poisoning, and then you can't walk, and it just sucks. And I've had food poisoning 5 times. It's terrible.
Yeah, have you had a lot of medical scares being outside any place that are really remote that were scary?
Yeah, well, I've had food poisoning 5 times in places you don't want to have food poisoning, each one of them. Venezuela, Iran, Turkmenistan, India, which is almost impossible to avoid, and then Kenya. And the one in Kenya happened to be, and I love Kenya. I've been to Kenya like 10 times, one of the best countries in Africa. But I happened to be in this remote safari lodge in the middle of the Masai Mara, and there's nothing around you. So I don't even know what I ate or whatever, and I was at a Fairmont or something nice, and but I just started puking uncontrollably, and I never really throw up, right? And I was just like, what the fuck? Anyway, this went on for like 12 hours. So finally, I'm just like on the phone with my travel insurance. I'm on the phone with my doctor in New York, and I'm on the phone with the hotel, and they're in the room with me. And I'm just like, what do I do? They're like, we'll call a doctor for you. And I was just like, you're going to call a doctor from like a village in the middle of the Masai Mara? Like, I don't know how I feel about that. They're like, oh, they'll just give you a shot with some fluids or something. And I'm like, there's no fucking way I'm taking a needle in the middle of the Masai Mara.
Yeah.
So my doctor's like, don't do it. Don't do it. So I'm like, I'm with the travel insurance, talking about getting helicoptered out back to Nairobi. And at the end of the day, just everything, I was just like, I'm going to give it till the morning. And I literally slept on the floor in the bathroom. And then I finally stopped puking. And it took me about 36 hours to be able to literally like stand up again. I mean, it was that bad, but that was the worst I ever had it. But luckily I was in a nice hotel. If I wasn't, it could have been a lot worse,
Do you think that was E. coli?
Man, I have no idea. Like, no idea. I'm
Yeah.
pretty careful with what I eat in places like that. But, sometimes you don't know. It could be the fork that was washed in some weird water, or some guy like picked his nose and put it on your knife. You like never know.
Yeah, I got E. coli in the Philippines because I got a burger at a cockfight, and I think the lettuce on the burger had been washed in poop water. And
Yeah, you got to watch the lettuce at those cockfights.
You do. I've always said that.
Yep.
I've always said it. Yeah.
Lettuce fever.
Common knowledge,
And then
That's day one shit.
I went to the local health clinic, which was just a shack, and they're like, go poop in this cup so we can get a stool sample. I poop in the cup, and there's no toilet paper. So now I got a shitty ass. I got to like walk through the waiting room with poop probably still dripping down my cheeks, and I hand it to them.
And in a Dixie cup.
Yeah, it was pretty much a Dixie cup. And then they come back 10 minutes later. They're like, yeah, you have amoebas, E. coli in your stool. And that's when I knew I was fucked. But they hooked me up to an IV. I felt like I was going to die for a few days, but I did recover. But I mean, the health clinic, I asked for water. They didn't even have any water. They were like, sorry, we don't have any, but if you give us your wallet, we'll send someone out to buy water. So that's what I had to do.
Yeah, man. If you've traveled to remote places, you're gonna have a lot of shit stories, horrible ones, and you're gonna get sick, and shit's just gonna happen. You just kind of got to roll with it, and it's just part of it. It just is what it is.
What adventures do you have lined up now?
I don't have anything really big planned until December. In December, I'm going back to the Middle East. Actually, I'll be in Saudi. But the main reason I'm going is to go to an island of Yemen called Socotra. It's in the Gulf of Aden. And the only reason I haven't been yet is because they used to have it was closed for many years. And then a couple of years, they got a weekly flight. But I didn't want to spend like a week on a little fucking island. So now they introduced a second seasonal flight from Abu Dhabi. So I can get there for like 4 days. So that's what I'm going to do. So go out to Yemen, the Emirates, Saudi, and I might add something else in yet. But that's the next kind of big adventure. Before that, just playing a lot of golf. I'm trying to get to 1,000 golf courses played. So I'm trying to rack them up.
Fuck,
Let's
man.
go.
That's awesome.
I got to know what's like the most extreme or exotic golf course you've ever played on.
Well, I told you about the Cabo Country Club in Cabo.
Yeah, you're
that was
right.
pretty wild.
Yep, it's
I
gotta be that.
played golf in Equatorial Guinea, which was just weird. I played in the Falkland Islands, but the coolest one was the most remote golf course on Earth is on the island of St. Helena, which is in the South Atlantic between Africa and South America, just north of Antarctica. And that's where Napoleon died. That's why he was exiled there and he died in exile. So that's what's most famous for. But they finally opened an airport. There's this whole saga with the airport. And I was on the 7th flight to go there. I wasn't going to be on the first because the wind shear action there was people, it was dangerous.
Yeah.
But I went and I played the most remote golf course in the world twice. And that was a big thrill. It was pretty cool.
Is that the most remote place on Earth?
I think technically the most remote place on Earth that people like me, these extreme traveler types go to is a place called Bouvet Island. Now, no one's ever heard of Bouvet, right? It's like this Norwegian island outpost that literally just has a weather vane. And I think ships land there about 20% of the time where they try to moor, and then you take a Zodiac into the beach. You just literally jump up and down and then you go back. So the reason I haven't been there is because there's nothing to fucking do there. And it's 2 or 3 months of your life to try to get there. And who the hell wants to, I know people who have done it. These people are crazy, by the way, but I don't need to do that. But I like places with actual people. And the most remote place that's populated that I've been to, I believe, is probably Pitcairn Island. I think they have a population of 50, and that's most famous for the mutiny on the Bounty or the sex scandal there back 20 something years ago.
Yeah, there was a mutiny, and then those people settled on Pitcairn Island, and then I guess it's descendants of those mutineers that still live there today.
Yeah, exactly. There's 4 families. So Fletcher Christian was the main guy, right? So you go now and there's the Christians, the Adams, the Browns, and I can't remember the name of the other family, but there's only about 49 or 50 people there, but they're they have quite a diaspora in New Zealand and Norfolk Island and a couple other places. And it's just fascinating place to go. Very difficult to get to, very expensive to get to, but one of the cooler trips I've ever done.
All right, so my last question, I'm setting it up. Me, you, and a couple other folks, we're going, and we can go anywhere in the world. Traveling there is not a problem. We can just snap our fingers and be there. What restaurant are you taking us to?
Oh, man.
Tough question.
Well, I'll give you one in America and I'll give you one outside America.
All right.
In America, I'm going Frank Pepe's Pizza in New Haven, Connecticut.
There you go.
And
I love that place.
New Haven's the best pizza in the country, I think.
Best pizza in the country. I grew up 20 minutes from there. I've been there 1,000 times. There's another place called Sally's on the same street, on Worcester Street in New Haven. Also kind of 1A, but I rank Pepe's, the original Pepe's ahead. That'd be my dying meal if I was to be executed tomorrow in America and I could choose, it would be that.
All right.
Other than that, it's very difficult to say. I'm going to choose Italian food is my favorite. My favorite restaurant in Europe is a place in Rome. It's called Taverna Trulusa. It's in Trastevere. And it's just unbelievable. I once saw an interview with Roger Federer. I'm a huge tennis fan, right? And I saw an interview with Roger Federer, and they asked him about his favorite restaurant in Rome, and he said this place. And I was out there for the tennis tournament. I'm like, well, if it's good enough for Fed, it's good enough for me. And I went there, and I've been back, I don't know, 15 times since. And anyone I know who goes to Rome, I recommend to go there. That place is just unbelievable.
Nice.
Got to get there.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. We'll be sure to preface that the episode is not just about Chad. So, because obviously that was a really small segment of what we talked about, even if that becomes the theme of the episode. Because you have some incredible stories. So come for the Chad, stay for the wild stories all over the globe.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Lee. Appreciate you, man.
If you had to say one good thing about Chad, could you think of one?
Yeah, sure. The people were super nice. It's like anywhere. Any country that, theoretically you don't like, it's never because of the people. It's just because of the circumstances around the country. That's all it is.
I would agree with that, although there are certain cities and stuff that are just known for a lot of scammers, hawkers. Is that the word I'm looking for? Who are the people that
could be
are constantly trying to sell you something? Is that
what's the biggest scammer city you've been to? And then I'll tell you mine.
Probably Cairo.
Yes, around the pyramids.
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
the main thing that can turn me off of a place if you're just constantly being hounded by people.
Badgered.
And they're just like, buy this. Do you want this? Do you want this? Do you want sex? Do you want drugs? Do you want and it just like, it gets so overwhelming. That's probably like most of my negative travel experiences probably revolve around that. But once you get away from them, those countries are usually beautiful.
I'll tell you a real quick story about mine. And the short answer is Lagos, Nigeria, which is the largest city in Africa. There's something like 30 million people there. It's one of the biggest cities in the world. And like 1 in 3 Africans are Nigerian, right? So, you hear about these online scams. A lot of them derive from there, right? So I go there for the first time and I was going to spend like 8 or 10 days or something like that and travel throughout the country. I'm in Lagos. First of all, I crossed over from the border of Benin. I get picked up by this guy. He tries to scam me right away. We go to some hotel. It was like $600 a night for a ship box, right? Lagos is one of these places. So then the next day, and the day after, 3 times in 2 days, police come up to me on the street 3 times in 2 days and threaten to throw me in jail if I don't give them money. And, they're like, oh, your visa's not legitimate or something like that. And I'm like, I know my visa's legitimate, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, what are you going to do, right? You're in their country. They have guns and like they can do whatever they want, right? So you're just like, God damn it. So then my favorite story to tell is I go to the ATM. How many times you gone to an ATM and gotten the wrong amount of money? It's never happened, right?
No.
Right.
So I go to the ATM multiple times in Nigeria to banks that you've seen like advertised like back then on like CNN. You saw like a bank advertisement, CNN International. And I was like, all right, go to the bank. And it wasn't like I asked for like $100 and got 99. It was like I asked for $100 and got 4, right? So then like,
Jeez.
Of course, you go into the bank to complain and you tell them like what happened. And, they have cameras up there and you're like, oh, just go look at the camera. And they're like, no, they don't work. You're just trying to rip us off. You're just like a thief or like whatever. And you're just like, motherfucker, you know what I mean?
Jeez.
So it's like, so I'm like, you know what? Fuck this. I'm out of here. And I just like literally hopped on a flight to Paris, I think it was. So, yeah, not a big fan of Lagos.
Damn. Well, where can people find you at if they want to look up some of your content too?
Yeah, sure. Follow me really anywhere, but Instagram is probably my favorite media handle, whatever you call it. At Lee Abbamonte, it's LeeAbbamonte. And if you want to look at some of my old adventures, I have a lot of stuff on my website. I don't really blog anymore, but for many years I did. But now it's mostly social media and television.
Yeah. And hey, you started traveling before social media was a thing, which I admire because I'm sure there's a lot of travel influencers that are mainly just traveling for the social media aspect, just because like, oh, I can get like a really cool post or do this. You were doing it for the love of the game.
Yeah, man, I was kind of the OG travel blogger, just doing it because I loved it. Never expected anything to happen. And, 15 years later, I'm still doing it.
Yeah, man. Well, we'll keep your contact. We'd love to have you back on for another country.
All right, guys, anytime. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Lee.
Talk soon.
All right.
All right, so we're dropping a pin in Chad.
Chad, just as we drew it up, we knew when we were sitting in the golf simulator talking about making this podcast, we had an idea. Top 10 episode absolutely has to be Chad.
Yes.
Absolutely has to be Chad. Because who doesn't want to go to the lovely metropolis that is known as Chad? So we have to put you in a little place in the world because I think, would you say of all the places that Americans like look at on a map, or that they hear about in the world, Africa is the place that they have the least frame of reference?
Yeah, there's just so many countries. I would say Chad always gets the biggest laugh out of an American.
Yeah.
Because what's a Chad in America? That's like a derogatory term for just a loser.
Like a frat boy, kind of. I think like frat boy is like a Chad.
All right, yeah. Dude's
Like a
an
very,
absolute
I think
Chad.
it's like the white guy version of a basic bitch.
Yeah, just a really corny ass dude.
Yeah, so like if you ask most people, I feel like, because I do a lot of the around the office questions that you might have seen on like Instagram and places like that, and I'll go around and anytime I ask something remotely close to Africa, no one except for Za has any idea.
Or KB.
KB.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he
KB knows.
He knows the capital of every African country.
Yeah.
Now, I knew very little about Chad going into this. I've just seen a bunch of YouTubers describe it as the worst country they've ever visited.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's pretty well deserved.
Yeah, after researching it a little bit, because we interviewed Lee like a week and a half ago, and we took some time to do a little bit of research on Chad. To give you an idea where Chad is, if you're driving down the road and you're listening to the audio-only version, Chad is basically right smack dab in the middle of Africa. Like if you were going to go take a pin and drop it in the middle of Africa, you'd likely be in Chad. So to give you, if we're going to start at the northern end, where you know that the right side, the western side is Egypt, northwest is Egypt, and then Libya. Right below Libya, neighbors with Niger and Sudan are where Chad is.
Yeah, Chad, the whole northern part of the country is the Sahara Desert. And then I think the lower third, you got some greenery. It's known as the dead heart of Africa.
Beautiful.
Is that, I mean, you got Uganda, which they call the Pearl of Africa.
Yeah.
Chad, it's the dead heart.
Yeah.
It's not the heart of Africa.
Yeah.
Maybe it was thousands of years ago, but that heart is dead.
Yes.
And it's now Chad. And it's called Chad, not named after a frat bro. It's named after Lake Chad. Because Chad, I guess, means lake in one of their local languages. So, I guess the country just means lake.
Yeah.
Head to lake. There is, I think it's got one of the largest lakes in Africa.
It does. It's right. I always forget what it's called, but it's a very common Jeopardy question.
Wait, what's the name of the lake?
Yeah.
It's Lake Chad.
Lake Chad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wait, no. I was thinking South America, Lake Titicaca.
Oh, okay, yes.
We should drop a pin in Lake Titicaca.
100%. Fascinating place.
Have you been?
No, but I've read about it. And they've
We
got
should go.
really ancient Incan ruins. They weren't even the Incans at that point, but like some of the oldest ruins in the Americas are around Lake Titicaca.
We need to go there.
That would be sick. It's high up. Now, Chad does have a giant lake, but apparently it has shrunk by as much as 95% since 1963. So
Property values are plummeting.
yeah, if you had lakefront property back in 1963, you are now in the desert.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of things that are kind of interesting about it. I had no idea the size. And again, like I think like me, like most Americans, you don't really have an idea of size of most African countries. To give you an idea of Chad, it is almost the same size as Alaska. It's twice as big as Texas.
It's definitely the largest landlocked country in Africa, and it's the fifth largest country in Africa by size. So that's neat. But then, it is leading the pack when it comes to corruption. It is, I think, dead last when it comes to countries being ranked on ease of doing business because it is so corrupt. It's high up in the poverty rankings, high up in access to clean water. Well, I guess at the very bottom when it comes to access to clean water. It's got the world's fifth highest fertility rate.
There we go. People be fucking.
That's not a good thing. It's always like the worst places you'd want to live where everybody's having babies. Whereas like in some countries, it'd be like Germany seems like a pretty comfortable place to live. They're not having kids these days.
Yeah, same thing with Japan.
Which is a shame for those kids because they're born in Chad, but it's not their fault. And as he mentioned, Lee, he said the people were super friendly.
Yeah. Per usual. And they do have some ability. I guess they have the natural resources to be able to eventually crawl out of poverty. They have quite a bit of oil.
They've got gold.
They've got gold.
And they've got uranium.
They've got uranium.
But it's so corrupt over there, they can't take advantage of that.
Yeah, and that's the part that really sucks about a lot of corruption is that you have the ability to make people's lives so much better, but they can't do simple things. Like they can't get the oil out of Chad. Like the oil that they have, they don't have the infrastructure to be able to have it leave and to actually make money.
Isn't that the problem with Iraq as well? Because they've got a lot of oil, but they don't have the oil refineries to make a profit out of it?
They did. They don't now. We took a lot of those out.
Okay, yeah. A lot of those got bombed?
Yeah, a lot of those got bombed, yep.
Yeah.
Oil fields, I'm sure you remember seeing videos of like outside of Kuwait whenever you're coming in that the Iraqis National Guard like lit them all on fire and you had like oil rain that was happening.
Yeah, I learned about that in the movie Three Kings.
Oh, yeah. And in Jarhead.
Oh, okay.
It's in Jarhead too.
Three Kings might be the best movie about the first Gulf War.
Oh, see, I would say Jarhead.
Well, Jarhead was about like the most current Iraq War.
It's Desert Storm.
Oh, it was? Okay. All right. They got a shortage of doctors. For every 23,600 Chadians, there's only one doctor.
How many?
23,600.
23 to 1?
23,600 to 1.
We got to bump those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers.
People to doctors. Now, historically, it's I guess it wasn't a strategic location for a bit because it's right on the border of the Sahara. So they would make a lot of their money, do all their trading for the cross-Saharan trade routes.
Okay.
Which were just these gigantic camel caravans that would go from Egypt, Morocco, Libya, and then would come down to sub-Saharan Africa and trade all sorts of stuff.
I also read that their primary language is French because of the French colonization.
Yes, it was a French colony for a while.
All the way up until 1960.
And so their official languages are French, Arabic, and then there's 100 other local languages, which is like why they sometimes call it the real-life Tower of Babel.
Yeah, and it gained his independence on August 11th of 1960. They're still having civil wars and uprisings, but we were talking about yesterday, they had a guy who was in charge since 1990. He took over in 1990, and his name was Idris Deby. And he was actually killed, one of the first leaders that I can think of in a long time that was killed on the front lines.
Yeah, he was fighting the rebels.
And I listened to this podcast, and they used a lot of local radio about that event. Mm-hmm. And they knew that there was a big rebel uprising, that people were going to try to come in and overthrow the government. So the president, which I cannot imagine our presidents any of the last 40, not really 40, probably since HW, that would volunteer to go to the front lines.
To go and fight. I mean, it was a common thing back in the Middle Ages.
Sure, yeah.
Richard the Lionheart, who was the king of England, also fought in the Crusades and fought some battles against France, I think.
And you were viewed as a coward if you didn't.
Yeah.
It was your men would refuse to fight for you a lot of times if you didn't show up on the battlefield, which makes sense. But this guy was killed after he was ruling from 1990 all the way to 2021. So he made it through COVID, but didn't make it through that battle.
Now, did the rebels take over the country after that?
So no, the rebels didn't, because they were going to have open elections, which is what the rebels wanted. And so the generals that were in charge, the military council that was in charge there, decided to get together, and they said, look, if the president got killed, and he was pretty beloved from what I've read, he was a liked character, not exactly the best leader of all time, but he was decently liked. Now, how much information is accurate, because it's coming from Chad and from an official government?
Yeah.
That's like North Korea says that Kim Jong-un's the greatest.
It's coming from Chad, where they only have one television station. I think it's known as Tele-Chad.
Just keep it simple, baby.
Yeah.
So the generals got together and they said, we're actually not going to have an open election. We're going to transfer over power to Idris Deby's son.
Okay.
And he's the one that has taken over, and he's been in charge for the last 3 years.
I guess it was the setting of one of the most interesting conflicts in modern history, something called the Toyota War, where Libya had taken over parts of Chad.
Very different from Toyota-thon.
Yes, very, not the Toyota-thon. Libya had taken over parts of Chad, taken advantage of Chad being involved in a civil war. And then when it finally came time to try to take that land back, they purchased 400 Toyota pickup trucks and armed them with anti-tank missiles.
Now, I've done podcasts specifically on that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
On the Toyota War?
On not the Toyota War, in breaking it down, but what weapon system would I attach to a small pickup, and they did it exactly right in Chad.
All right, well that's all you need, dude.
Yeah, so they take these little sub trucks that are like the Tundras. It usually was Tacoma size.
Very reliable.
Very reliable. I mean, they could be doing war crimes in Chad for 400,000 miles in those bad boys.
Yeah.
As long as they change the oil. But they would put what's called the 240 Golf machine gun on it, which is a pretty powerful, shoots a 7.62 size bullet, which is pretty big, the same bullet caliber that would come from like an AK-47. So they have a lot of firepower that go on those things. And because they're small and light and they up armor them, they're really, really effective.
Yeah, apparently they were running circles around the Libyan strongholds, and they destroyed hundreds of tanks with minimal losses.
Yeah.
So you want to
Their maneuverability is
take
just so
over-
much higher.
yeah, you want to take over a third world country, just load up on Toyota Tacomas.
Yeah. That should be that should be like a Super Bowl commercial for them.
Yes. I'm sure it's not the first time that Toyota's been used in wars.
Absolutely not. Like they've been used in like they had some in Afghanistan. They roll through Iraq, like because they're so great and like it's so dusty and like the Sub-Sahara like so dusty that the Toyotas don't have any problems because they're made so well. Mm-hmm. I mean, really, that should be a test for your truck. Do militants use it?
Yeah. Will it survive armed conflict?
Yeah.
Chad is pretty damn dusty, but right now they're experiencing horrendous floods. So it's the worst of both worlds.
Yeah.
Like most of the year, it's just dust and insane heat. But I guess once every 5 to 10 years, they get torrential downpours and the entire country floods.
Yep. And they, like like a lot of countries in that area, have a big problem with terrorism too. So there's two main groups that operate in that area. One is Boko Haram. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Boko Haram.
Yes, I am.
But they are basically, they're kind of like African ISIS, where they are unbelievably brutal in the things that they do, like the beheadings. They are big on not just like setting people on fire, but doing it in groups where they'll take like whole families, put them in cages and set them on fire.
Oh, geez.
They, if you remember a few years ago when militants from Boko Haram went into a school and kidnapped like 70 girls. And
yeah, I remember hearing that.
yeah,
That may have been like Kenya or something, or Uganda.
There's been several
they've
stories.
operated there too.
Because they operate so much in sex trafficking, they
Yes.
do it all over the region, but it's really bad there. So Boko Haram and what was the other one? Not Boko Haram. Al-Shabaab is another big time militant Islamic terrorist group that operates out of there.
And I know in the first episode we were deciding to do a segment where we say like what it would be like going to prison there. Chad might be like the worst place to go to prison, because I guess like Boko Haram operates a lot of their prisons. It says the day-to-day administration of the prison was managed by prisoners suspected of having links to Boko Haram.
Yeah, Boko Haram, I mean, ISIS is probably not the best example. The Taliban is what they aspire to be. They aspire to be the controlling group too, like where it is their government and they control things the way that they want to.
Okay.
Scary shit. Scary spot to
scary,
be.
dude.
Not a spot that you want to go hang out with. I think both of the travel folks that we've talked to that have been to Chad have said they probably wouldn't go back. And I'm going to say I'm probably not going to go there, period.
I don't think I'll be going to Chad. I mean, I wouldn't turn down a free trip if the Chad Tourism Board wants to fly me out and change my mind. I'd be open to it.
So I looked up some different cultural differences between here and the U.S. that if you do decide to travel to Chad that you need to know about. One, they're one of the cultures that if they offer you something in food that you take it. Otherwise, they view it as very rude. Their gender roles are very, we'll say, traditional, but they also do a lot of polygamy.
Okay.
Yeah.
They aren't the only ones.
Nope, they're not the only ones. Time perception, the concept of time is Chad is more fluid. They do not operate on Tom Coughlin time.
I think a lot of Africa might operate on Chad time.
Yeah, so it's a pretty traditional country is what you would think of for that area of the world. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah, I mean, when you say they practice polygamy, I guess that still happens in a lot of Arabic countries.
And the United States.
Mormons.
Yeah.
Is that still legal amongst the Mormons?
It's not legal, no, but it happens mainly in like really fucked up sects. Like
Yes.
The Idaho Mormons, they fly under the radar big time.
I read that book, Under the Banner of Heaven, which
Yeah.
I think is about polygamous Mormons.
Mm-hmm. I used to watch every documentary I could. I was fascinated by it.
They were taking some young brides, though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It was concerning.
Yep. A lot of those guys that ran those sects are in prison now, like Jeffrey Warren.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Well, here's kind of a positive fact about Chad. One of the reasons why the Amazon rainforest is so productive is because Chad's Bodeli Depression contains superfine dust, which is taken by trade winds all the way to the Amazon rainforest.
All the way. I see when you said Amazon, I was like, he means Nile, but you mean Amazon.
I mean the Amazon rainforest. So the dust from Chad gets blown over to the rainforest, and I think it like helps the soil over there.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yep.
That's so fucking far.
Yeah.
That's pretty far.
It is far, but hey, I guess one man's trash is another man's treasure.
That's right. Yeah.
Chad's trash is Amazon's treasure.
Yep. And they live like many other people in that block of the world where they live in mud bricked homes with thatched roofs, and they have nomadic style that they live in tents, and they go where the water is and a lot of times where the food is as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're also known for their camel wrestling. They have some of the best not camel wrestling, that's Turkey. Watch my video on that. Camel racing. They have some of the best camel racers in the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, do they do it like Kentucky Derby style?
I think it's a straight line. I don't think they run around a track. I would be interested to know.
Have you ever had camel meat?
I guess not, but it is eaten.
I watched the video on it the other day of somebody smoking a camel's hump on a barbecue, and it looked horrific. It looked like the fattiest, gristliest piece of shit I've ever seen. I mean, I guess if that is the texture, you would have to barbecue it low and slow. They need to bring some camel hump to Texas. Do it low and slow with just a little bit of pepper and salt.
A little hump.
Yeah.
So are those humps hollow? Because that's where they keep their water?
The hump's just like fat.
Yeah, apparently camels do race on a circular track.
Okay.
And when I was in Qatar for the World Cup, they have camel racing now. It used to be little boys that would race the camels, and then they had to ban that for some reason. So now they have little robots on top of each of the camels, and you can go and bet. And the robots, I think, just kind of go like boom and
like hit them.
Yeah, hit
Push
them
'em.
a little, and you can bet on the camel racing.
Get that on DraftKings.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
We should see it, and that should be ours. The drop a pin pick of the week, the best camel racing robot.
Dude, that
Have a
would
couple
be,
parlays hit.
if there is any way to bet remotely on Qatar robot camel racing. But Chad camel racers. Yeah, like one of the tribes there, there's a YouTube video, camel racing in Chad, the best camel racers in the world.
Shit. I didn't know they had it like that. But they do a lot of other things too. They use cattle as currency still. That's how you show your wealth, is having a shit ton of cattle.
That makes sense. I think we can talk to Za about that. They do that in Zimbabwe too. They play an instrument that looks very cool. It's called a
Didgeridoo?
It's the same length as a didgeridoo. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, it's called a kakaki. It's a 10-foot long metal trumpet used by the local population. We'll throw in a photo of that.
10 foot long. Maybe a sound too.
Yeah.
Need to hear that. Maybe they can play a little Ave Maria on that bad boy.
Yeah, let's hear some kakaki. Kakaki right now. Boom. We'll throw in a soundbite.
What do you want to hear? Moonlight Sonata?
Moonlight Sonata on the kakaki. Go.
That was beautiful.
That was so beautiful.
All right, I think that about wraps up Chad. That's all I know
that's
about
good.
Chad, and I'll be honest with you, Johnny, that's all I care to know about Chad. I got only so many limited brain cells. I'm not devoting them to Chad.
All right, well, we got Chad out of the way early, and we can move on to greener pastures.
Yep.
But I'll end it with one more happy fact.
All right.
One of the countries that is least affected by light pollution.
Oh, well, there you go.
So I'm sure you got some great stars.
Yeah, get this star as long as there's no dust covering on its way to Amazon.
Yeah.
As long as that's
It might
not
be
happening.
a thick cover of dust.
All right, well, let's move into some getting cultured. All right, it's time for everybody's favorite segment, and this time we're going to do a little getting cultured with our good pal, Megan Making Money, also known as Megan Making Munchies. Megan, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me on the show. Two of my favorite guys right here in this very studio.
Oh, gas us up, Mom. We fucking love it. So we ask everybody to come in from the office and have a question that they want to ask me and Donnie about getting cultured. Mego, what's yours?
So I have two, and both of these are something that I would definitely not be doing. So, these are for other people. These are This is a question that scared people want to know. What is the best way to travel with drugs?
Chaps, you used to work with dogs, right?
Yeah, so for those that are listening, I haven't talked about much of my past yet on this show, but I was a dog trainer in the Marine Corps for 9 years. My last job that I had in the Marine Corps, I was the chief military working dog instructor for the whole Marine Corps. So I was the chief trainer for every Marine.
You're the top dog.
That was there, yeah. I was the one that certified the dogs to make sure that they were able to leave like the dog school and go to wherever they were going to go around the world. That being said, we also sent students over to the TSA. And TSA, primarily, their mission is bombs. Like, their mission is safety for the American public whenever they're doing any type of air travel. So if you're going to put in the money, and each one of these dogs to train is 50 to 70 grand whenever they're completed with the training program, you're going to do it in an area that makes people the safest and gets your money the first where it goes. So they're not wasting money on drugs, now on drug dogs. So if you're in an airport like Miami or San Diego, sometimes Houston, that have like big international ports attached to them, then you can have some drug dogs that are going to be there. But if you're in the terminal and you're going through somewhere with your personal carry-ons, you are in absolutely damn near 0% danger of one of those dogs you come across being a drug dog. It is almost always going to be. Because think about the risk versus reward, right? Like how much drugs can you really transfer on your person? Not enough to make an international difference. Not enough for cops to even really give a fuck about it. Bombs, though, that's a different story.
Do you think that works the same for like TSA? Like if they're, scanning your bag when it's going through, they're just like, as long as it doesn't tick or go boom, we're cool?
Yep.
At least they don't care about drugs for personal use.
Right.
I mean, drug trafficking, that's not always done through TSA. Sometimes that's done through the port where they try to like hide drugs in big shipping containers.
Port's totally different. If you're shipping things through ports, that's totally different. But if you're in the airport and you're going through with your carry-on or even your stowaway, they're not super worried about that if you're coming domestically. I would do it internationally for sure, but domestically,
I learned Brittany Gardner the hard way.
you're in like damn near no danger.
But hey, I still wouldn't recommend drug trafficking. You do hear stories of people traveling to Indonesia or Australia, and they don't just have drugs for personal use. They get caught with, a pound of crystal meth.
I'm speaking strictly domestically.
Okay.
Internationally, just don't do it because I don't know what they fucking do another. I guess I should have clarified that.
Yeah.
State to state, inside your own state, they don't give a fuck at all.
Now, obviously, I would never transport drugs, but if I was going to do it, say like shrooms, those can just be broken into small pieces, mixed in with some trail mix. They're not going to go through your trail mix and be like, this looks like it doesn't belong there.
Well, I know that you have traveled with drugs before because your traveling with drugs created my worst podcasting moment ever. Do you know this?
No.
So it was a few years ago, and it was...
Oh, yeah.
So Donnie had just came back from Colorado.
Yep.
And you went to a Rockies game, I think, right? And you got pretty high at a Rockies game?
No, I was just at a friend's wedding, and then I did a weed crawl because weed was just legalized in Colorado.
It was right when it had just became legal.
Yeah, so they had these party buses that would take you to all the dispensaries just to like buy weed and then do it on the bus. It honestly sucked. Like after the first dispensary, I had enough weed.
You don't need a whole lot.
I was way too high. It was me and a friend and like two other random girls on the crawl, and we were like too stoned to even talk to them. So we're just like awkwardly in a party bus, just being like, holy shit, I'm high.
and this was before I did any type of weed because I wasn't allowed. Like I still had drug tests and shit that I had to do. So I took this. Donnie and I shared a desk sometimes in the old New York office whenever we were there together because we weren't in the office at the same time a lot, and that was one that was open. So he would use it, I would use it, and I just saw a pack of gummy bears that was sitting on your desk. And I reached inside and grabbed 2, popped them in. I was like, he won't care. It's fucking 2 gummy bears. Who would care about 2 gummy bears? They're weed gummy bears. And I knew it the moment I chewed them and swallowed it.
And you were like,
because I could taste it. Mm-hmm. That day was September 8th. We had a podcast coming out for September 11th. That was going to be the first time that Large had told his story.
God, what an awful time to be too high.
It was about 9/11. It was going to be the first time that he told it on like podcast form on Barstool. And we knew it was going to be a pretty special interview. So we didn't even just have like the normal studio set up. We went down and we got like this nice little place. It was real intimate. It was me, Kate, Cons, and Large. And we were all sitting on stools. And since I'm the one that kind of like leads the show, I start off and I'm like, so we have Large. I tell what we're going to talk about. And I was like, but the focus of the story is going to be 9/11. And I immediately start laughing when I say 9/11. But I had told him what had happened before.
Thank God.
And so right after that, I was like, we had been in doing the podcast for maybe 5 minutes. And I was like, I can't do this. And Kate had to take it over. And I went back to the hotel, laid down, and felt like I had the spinnies for about 5 hours.
Oh, yikes.
Because I think it was like 50 milligrams, and I hadn't done weed in over 15 years.
That's a lot of milligrams for even if you do
a lot. Even now, if I did 50 now, I would be fucked up.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Large is a very understanding guy.
Yeah.
You just had to get like one question out, like tell us your story, and then just sit back and not laugh.
Yeah, I was out. I was like, I can't do this, because that's when I feel like it's some of the best times when you're high and you're not supposed to laugh, and then you do.
Like funerals?
And you're like keeping it in. Yeah, well, I don't have that personal experience, but sure, back. So to answer your question in a roundabout way, don't worry about it. Unless you're going international.
Yeah, I mean, do not transport drugs internationally.
Got it.
If you wanted to, though, hypothetically, I assume LSD would be the easiest drug because it's literally just a piece of paper.
Yeah.
Sheets.
And I've always wondered.
Or acid just acid in like a little water bottle or like an eyedropper maybe too.
Yeah, an eyedropper. I've always wondered, though, like dogs can be trained to smell weed, cocaine, heroin, crystal meth, I'm sure. Can dogs be trained to like smell LSD or smell mushrooms?
Yeah. So whenever you're training a drug dog, there's 6 different types of drugs that you train each drug dog on. See if I can remember them. It's coke, meth, it's hash, weed, heroin, and fentanyl now has been added. They're doing like imprinting is what it's called on fentanyl. So the basic tenet is, and same thing for explosive, there's 9 different types of explosives. If you can teach your dog to find those 6 things, those 6 types of drugs, the other drugs are going to be made of those same kind of components.
Right.
So we kind of view it as like colors. You teach your dog to find the primary colors, and then the colors in between on the scale they can find too.
Yes.
So there's 9 main different types of explosives, but in the world there's like 5,000 different types of explosives. But if you teach them to find these 9 types that we train them, by and large, your overlap is going to be 97, 98% of all exploding things you'll be able to find.
That's really smart. I never would have thought of it like that.
So it's the same thing with like no matter what, you can do it with, there's dogs that'll find rotted telephone poles that like, so on these like up the Canadian Rockies, for example, like in the valley right by the base of the mountains, they'll have these long telephone poles that stretch out for tens and tens of miles. Well, instead of somebody walking that, they'll have like checkpoints where they'll release a dog and the dog will go off leash and he'll run up those and then come back so that the guy actually checking doesn't have to drill. They have
dogs are amazing.
Yeah. Cancer. They do cancer. They train them to find COVID whenever that was going on. They have dogs for epilepsy. They have dogs for diabetes.
Invasive species?
Invasive species. Yep. Like, so there's dogs that they use to track like the pythons that are taking over in Florida.
Iguanas?
Yep.
maybe,
Iguanas.
too?
They do that too. Yeah. The hunting dogs for iguana are amazing.
What are they?
Typically, I mean, they use a lot of beagles for those because beagles are.
Shout out beagles. I think there's a big beagle being potentially adopted today by Dave.
Oh yeah,
Mr.
yeah,
Pete?
yeah.
Pete the
Beagle. Yeah. So beagles are great because they were imprinted and trained for the longest time on how to like tree bobcats. Is how they were really used at first in like Montana and Idaho.
Okay.
So they
With
tree
those big
things pretty easy,
howls.
and then you just go up there with a pellet gun and
Yeah.
shoot the iguana out of the sky.
That's really
Yeah, but
cool.
don't traffic drugs internationally.
True.
There have been cases where Indonesia has just murdered you. You get the death penalty. You get caught trying to bring a couple kilos of meth. They're like, nope, no second chances. You're going to be hung.
But it also did create one of the single greatest rap songs of the early 2010s with Metro Boomin and Future, 40 Nights.
Is that about?
Yep. It's because he went to Dubai and had like a roach in his backpack. But he said he didn't. It was a brand new backpack. And he went, and Metro Boomin was in jail in Dubai for 40 days. and 40
Also,
nights.
fun fact, a lot of people don't know what Metro looks like. Actually, a really good looking guy.
That is fun. Yeah,
No
I'll put
one
him up
knows
on the.
that.
We'll put him up right here. Yeah.
I think it's so I mean, Dubai flies out rappers all the time. Rick Ross, French Montana. And if you listen to their lyrics, they're like a large part of them are about drugs and drinking and stuff. And I feel like they kind of just turn a blind eye. Because if you're
They didn't for Metro, that's for
They
sure.
didn't for Metro, but they're being flown out by the sheiks over there, and so it's like, I'm sure a lot of the times if you're close enough with one of them,
I
they
know
can be
it's
like,
not a
just
slur, but
just
that
whatever.
sounds like a slur.
What?
A sheik.
A sheik?
Yeah, I know
Actually,
it's not.
it might be
but
pronounced shake.
Shake.
All
Either
right.
way, it just
It's a
it
shake.
sounds just my ears were like. "Ooh."
Yeah.
I think it sounds cool.
It does sound cool.
Yeah.
There's a lot of words that sound cool that you can't say though. Only other question.
Don't fire through them, Megan.
Yes, yeah.
Only other
Don't give your definitive list of words you want to say.
No. Only other question I have, and it should be a pretty quick answer. Obviously, I know with elevation and drinking, the higher elevation, the quicker you get drunk. And what is the elevation like as far as traveling wise on an airplane? Like, what is one beer on the airplane compared to one beer, say, sitting here in this office?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I've never thought about that. I do probably the majority of my drinking at the airport before taking off.
I don't like drinking when I'm on the plane nearly as much because I hate getting up to pee.
Yeah, it's a big problem. I'm just curious just because
But I think it's 2-1. I do feel like I get way more drunk on a plane than I do.
Well, I mean, if
on-
you're in Colorado and they say you're at a certain elevation, 2 is 1. So I was curious if you're in a fucking plane is 1 3. I don't know.
Because you could have like a couple double gin and tonics and feel on the moon. When you're on
yeah,
a flight.
literally on the moon.
Yeah.
Like an astronaut.
Sometimes I'll do poor man's Xanax on the flight, which is 2 glasses of red wine and 2 NyQuil capsules.
Oh, I love that.
You will be out for the count.
It's a poor man's.
Edibles.
I like it.
Once you get them through TSA.
TSA.
Once you
Yeah,
get
get your
them through
THC through TSA.
Yeah, but you get into the THC people. But yeah, that's kind of those are my 2 questions.
I did get drunk up at Everest Base Camp, and
How many beers?
say probably 5.
And you were just really drunk though?
pretty drunk. I never got sloppy drunk up there. It was fun though. At first they kind of scared me away from drinking. They're like, this altitude is dangerous. Don't drink at all. But I wasn't actually climbing Everest. I had already done all the hard work. I'd made it up to base camp. And so I was drinking up there, having fun. Hangovers weren't too bad.
I saw something about Everest. I'm all over the place here, but not to be morbid. But so I don't know if it's completely true or not. But that the people that have passed away at a certain point, as far as height wise, on Everest, eventually they just have to die there, and their bodies are pretty much completely frozen and composed because again it's so cold. So like if you move them, you're risking your own life, your air supply, avalanche issues, things of that nature.
Yeah, I know when you
don't
climb
know.
Everest, you're almost guaranteed to see at least one dead body. And there's one body up there that has been up there for a
forever,
good,
right?
yeah, at least 20 years and still
Jeez.
pretty well preserved.
Yeah, that was I went all over the place. I dropped a pin and drugs, alcohol, fun names, and then morbidity.
But
Yeah.
on average, you got to take your own poop back now.
I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I'm just not
Do
a
you used to not
mountain
have
climber.
to?
And just in case we have a sponsor for this segment, we would never condone transporting drugs of any kind anywhere.
That's why I started with it. Would never be me, but
Yeah.
I'm asking for the people that are curious out there, but not for the guys that are trying to traffic and kill people. I'm talking about more recreational users that don't deserve to be in jail.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, especially when like weed's legal in a lot of the country these days.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. I have to tinkle really bad. Is it okay if I hop out?
Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank you.
Megan.
How about